30 years ago, a wall of wind came roaring across the American heartland, and for millions of moviegoers, it felt real. The sky turned black, the sirens screamed, pickup trucks tore across empty roads, and at the center of it all was a group of storm chasers who made danger feel thrilling, human, and unforgettable. Twister was not just a disaster movie, it was a summer memory. It was Helen Hunt standing against the wind. It was Bill Paxton chasing the life he tried to leave behind. It was Dusty laughing in the face of chaos. It was a film filled with noise, speed, fear, and heart. But 30 years later, watching Twister feels different. Some of its stars went on to bigger fame. Some quietly stepped away from the spotlight. And some are no longer here to see how deeply this movie is still loved. Bill Paxton is gone. Philip Seymour Hoffman is gone. Yet somehow, the storm they helped create is still alive. To understand why Twister still matters in 2026, you have to remember what Hollywood felt like in the summer of 1996. This was before superhero universes took over the box office. Before every blockbuster needed a dozen sequels, timelines, and post-credit scenes. Twister was built on something much simpler, and in many ways, much more powerful. Ordinary people driving straight into extraordinary danger. The movie gave audiences a kind of thrill they could feel in their chest. The open roads, the dark clouds, the flashing lightning, the sound of wind tearing through houses, fields, and memories. It made the American Midwest feel enormous, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. But what made Twister last was not only the tornadoes, it was the people chasing them. Jo Harding was not just running toward storms. She was running toward the childhood trauma that never left her. Bill Harding was not just returning to an old job. He was returning to a life and a love he had never fully escaped. That is why, 30 years later, Twister is more than a disaster film. It is a time capsule of 1990s Hollywood. A reminder of when summer movies could be loud, emotional, practical, messy, and full of human faces we actually remembered. And at the center of that storm was Helen Hunt, the woman who made Jo Harding feel less like an action heroine and more like someone still trying to outrun the worst day of her life. When Twister begins, Jo Harding is not chasing tornadoes for fame. She is chasing the moment that changed her life. As a little girl, Jo watched a storm take her father away, and years later, that loss still lives inside her. It is in the way she looks at the sky. It is in the way she refuses to back down. It is in the way she drives toward danger while everyone else would be running from it. Helen Hunt gave Jo Harding something that made the character unforgettable. She did not play her as a fearless action hero. She played her as someone brave because she had already been broken. By 1996, Helen Hunt was already beloved by American audiences because of Mad About You. But Twister showed a different side of her. Here, she was intense, determined, sunburned, windblown, and completely believable as a woman who had built her entire life around understanding the thing that destroyed her childhood. And that is why Jo became the emotional center of the movie. The tornadoes were massive. The special effects were groundbreaking. The action was loud enough to shake a theater. But Helen Hunt made sure the story still had a heartbeat. After Twister, her career rose even higher. She went on to win major acclaim for As Good as It Gets, continued working in film and television, and later moved into directing and more personal projects. She did not always chase the biggest spotlight. Instead, she built the kind of career that belonged to someone who cared more about the work than the noise around it. And in many ways, that made her even more interesting. Because Helen Hunt never needed to become a permanent blockbuster machine to remain important. She had already given audiences something that lasted. A woman standing in the middle of chaos, refusing to let the storm win. But Jo Harding was only one half of Twister's emotional center. The other half was Bill Harding, the man who tried to leave the storm behind, only to discover that some parts of your past never truly let you go. Bill Paxton entered Twister as a man trying to convince himself he was done with the life that made him who he was. Bill Harding was no longer supposed to be a storm chaser. He had a new life waiting for him, a new relationship, and a future that looked safer, cleaner, and more predictable. He came back only to get Joe to sign the divorce papers. At least, that was what he told himself. But the moment he stepped back into that world, the trucks, the maps, the radios, the team, the smell of rain in the air, it became clear that Bill had never truly left. That was the magic Bill Paxton brought to the role. He made Bill Harding feel like a man caught between two lives. One part of him wanted peace, the other part still knew exactly how to read the sky. He was not the loudest character in the movie, he was not the wildest. He did not need to be. Paxton had a way of making ordinary men feel deeply human. He could stand in the middle of chaos and still make you believe there was a real person underneath the action. In Twister, that mattered. Because without Bill Harding, the movie would only be about chasing tornadoes. With him, it became a story about memory, love, regret, and the strange pull of the life you thought you had escaped. And for many fans, Bill Paxton was one of those actors who made every movie better simply by being in it. Before and after Twister, he became part of some of the most memorable films and shows of his generation. Audiences knew him from Aliens, from Apollo 13, from Titanic, from countless roles where he brought warmth, humor, fear, and sincerity without ever seeming false. He had the rare quality of feeling both familiar and irreplaceable. Then, in 2017, Bill Paxton passed away, and for people who grew up watching him, the loss felt personal. It was not just that Hollywood had lost a talented actor, it was that a certain kind of presence had disappeared. The kind of actor who could make a blockbuster feel like it still had a soul. Watching Twister now, his scenes carry a different weight. When Bill looks at the storm, when he argues with Joe, when he slips back into the rhythm of the chase, it is impossible not to feel the sadness of knowing that the man behind that performance is gone. But that is also why his work endures. Bill Paxton made Bill Harding more than a hero in a disaster movie. He made him a man pulled back into the storm by love, by instinct, and by a part of himself he could never fully bury. And if Bill Paxton gave Twister its human center, then another actor gave it its wild, unforgettable energy. A young Philip Seymour Hoffman playing Dusty long before the world fully understood just how great he would become. Long before Philip Seymour Hoffman became one of the most respected actors of his generation, he was Dusty in Twister. Loud, strange, funny, fearless, and impossible to ignore. Dusty was not the main character. He was not the romantic lead. He was not the man with the big emotional wound driving the story forward. But every time he appeared, the movie changed temperature. He brought a wild, almost reckless energy to the storm-chasing team. He laughed when the sky looked deadly. He shouted over the wind. He treated danger like a private joke only he and the storm understood. And somehow, in a movie filled with massive tornadoes, flying debris, and enormous visual effects, Dusty still managed to steal scenes with nothing more than personality. At the time, many viewers probably saw him as comic relief, the funny guy, the eccentric one, the storm chaser who made the group feel alive. But looking back now, Dusty feels different, because we know what Philip Seymour Hoffman became. After Twister, he did not simply become famous. He became one of those actors other actors studied. He had a gift for disappearing into people who were complicated, broken, awkward, brilliant, lonely, or quietly desperate. He could play arrogance, shame, tenderness, cruelty, insecurity, and intelligence, sometimes all in the same scene. He went on to appear in films like Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Almost Famous, The Talented Mr. Ripley, Capote, Doubt, The Master, and The Hunger Games. And with Capote, he reached the highest level of recognition, winning the Academy Award and proving what many had already suspected. This was not just a memorable supporting actor. This was a once-in-a-generation talent. That is what makes watching Dusty today so bittersweet. In Twister, he is young. He is loose. He is full of noise and life. He feels like someone who could run straight into the storm and come back laughing. There is no heaviness around him yet, At least not on screen. Just energy.
Just promise. Just a performer so alive that even a few minutes of screen time could leave a mark. Then, in 2014, Philip Seymour Hoffman passed away, and Hollywood lost one of its finest artists far too soon. Now, when fans return to Twister, Dusty is no longer just the wild guy in the van. He is a reminder of what Hoffman could do even before the world fully understood his greatness. He could take a small role and make it unforgettable. He could enter a blockbuster built around tornadoes and somehow leave behind a human impression that lasted for decades. That is the strange power of his performance. The storm was supposed to be the thing we remembered. But for many people, it was Dusty's grin, his voice, his chaos, and his joy that stayed with them. And while Hoffman's story became one of the most painful parts of Twister's legacy, another cast member followed a very different path. One that led away from traditional Hollywood fame and into a life almost no one expected. In Twister, Jamie Gertz played Melissa Reeves, the woman who walked into the storm without truly understanding what she was stepping into. Melissa was Bill Harding's new fiancée, polished, practical, and completely out of place among a group of storm chasers who treated tornadoes like old enemies. She was not built for dirt roads, flying debris, screaming radios, or the emotional history between Bill and Joe. But that was what made her role work. Through Melissa, the audience could see just how strange and dangerous this world really was. She was the outsider looking at the madness and asking the question any normal person would ask. Why would anyone choose this life? After Twister, Jamie Gertz did not follow the typical path of a blockbuster actress chasing every major role. She continued acting, but her life gradually moved in a different direction. Away from constant Hollywood attention, she became known for a world far beyond movie sets. Family, business, philanthropy, and a high-profile connection to professional basketball through the Atlanta Hawks. Her story is one of the most surprising in the Twister cast. Because while some actors spent decades chasing the spotlight, Jamie Gertz seemed to prove that life after fame does not always mean disappearing. Sometimes it means choosing a different kind of power. And from Melissa's outsider role, the story now turns to the man who played Twister's most memorable rival, Cary Elwes, the polished villain who thought he could buy his way into the storm. In Twister, Cary Elwes played Jonas Miller, the kind of rival every great adventure movie needs. Jonas was polished, funded, confident, and completely convinced that technology and money could make him better than the people who truly understood the storm. He had the equipment. He had the sponsors. He had the image of success. But what he did not have was heart. That contrast made him the perfect opposite of Joe and Bill's team. They were messy, underfunded, emotional, and driven by obsession. Jonas looked like the future, but he felt empty. And Cary Elwes played him with just enough charm to make audiences enjoy disliking him. Long before Twister, Elwes had already become beloved through The Princess Bride. But after Twister, he proved he could survive across genres, generations, and changing Hollywood trends. He appeared in thrillers, comedies, horror films, television dramas, and later found new recognition with projects like Saw and Stranger Things. His career did not depend on one role. That is what makes Cary Elwes so interesting in the Twister story. He was never trapped by Jonas Miller. Instead, he became one of those familiar Hollywood faces who could disappear into a movie, return years later, and still make audiences say, "I know him." In a film where some stars burned brightly and others were lost too soon, Cary Elwes remained a survivor. And after the polished villain of the storm, Twister gave audiences someone much warmer, Aunt Meg, the gentle soul who reminded us that even in a disaster movie, home still mattered. In the middle of Twister's noise, speed, and destruction, Lois Smith gave the movie something it desperately needed. She gave it warmth. As Aunt Meg, she was not a storm chaser. She was not racing across the plains with radios screaming and maps flying across the dashboard. She was the person waiting at home. The person who fed everyone, welcomed everyone, and reminded Joe that there was still a life beyond the storm. Aunt Meg's house became one of the most memorable places in the film because it felt safe. It was full of food, laughter, family, and history. For a few moments, the movie slowed down and the audience could breathe. That was Lois Smith's quiet power. She did not need a huge dramatic speech to matter. Her presence alone made Aunt Meg feel real. The kind of woman many viewers recognized from their own lives. Strong, kind, practical, and deeply rooted. After Twister, Lois Smith continued a remarkable career across film, television, and theater. She remained one of those respected performers who may not always stand in the center of the poster, but always brings truth to the screen. And in Twister, that truth mattered, because without Aunt Meg, the movie would have been only about the storm outside. Lois Smith reminded us of the storm inside Joe, and the home she was still afraid to lose. But Twister's supporting team had more than warmth. It also had sharp, funny, unforgettable character actors, including Alan Ruck, whose Hollywood story would find a surprising second life decades later. In Twister, Alan Ruck played Rabbit, one of the storm chasers who made Joe and Bill's team feel like a real, lived-in family. Rabbit was not the leader, he was not the emotional center. But he had something just as important. He knew the roads, the shortcuts, the back ways, and the land itself. In a movie where every second mattered, Rabbit felt like the kind of person you wanted in the truck when the sky turned black. Alan Ruck brought a sharp, natural humor to the role. He made Rabbit feel easy to like, a little eccentric, a little nervous, but completely part of the team. Of course, many viewers already knew Ruck from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where he became unforgettable as Cameron Fry. But what makes his career so interesting is that he did not remain frozen in that one classic role. Years later, a new generation discovered him again through Succession. As Connor Roy, Ruck found one of the strongest second acts of his career, proving that Hollywood sometimes takes decades to give an actor another role that fully reminds people how good they are. That is why his place in Twister feels special today. Rabbit was one piece of a larger ensemble. But Alan Ruck's later success shows how even the supporting faces in this movie had stories that continued far beyond the storm. And he was not the only one. Hidden throughout Twister were actors whose screen time was small, but whose careers would grow in ways many viewers never expected. One of the reasons Twister still feels alive after 30 years is that even its smaller roles were filled with actors who brought personality to every corner of the movie. These were not just background faces standing beside the trucks. They made the storm-chasing team feel real, chaotic, funny, loyal, and slightly obsessed in the way only people chasing tornadoes could be. Todd Field appeared as Belzer, one of the members of Joe's crew. At the time, many viewers simply saw him as part of the team. But years later, Field became far more recognized behind the camera, earning major respect as a filmmaker with movies like In the Bedroom, Little Children, and Tar. Jeremy Davies played Lawrence, another member of the crew, and went on to build a long career as one of Hollywood's most distinctive character actors. His later work in shows like Lost and Justified proved that even a quiet, unusual screen presence could become unforgettable in the right role. Anthony Rapp was also part of Twister's ensemble, before becoming closely associated with Rent and later Star Trek Discovery. And Alexa Peña-Vega, who appeared as young Joe, would later become known to a whole generation through Spy Kids. That is what makes Twister fascinating to revisit. The movie did not just capture a storm. It captured a group of actors at very different stages of their lives, some already known, some just beginning, and some still waiting for the roles that would define them later. And now, 30 years after the film first hit theaters, one question becomes impossible to avoid. Who from the Twister cast is still with us? And who has sadly passed away? 30 years after Twister first brought its storm chasers to the big screen, looking back at the cast brings a different kind of emotion. Many of the faces from the film are still with us. Helen Hunt, the heart of the movie, continues to be remembered as Jo Harding, one of the most powerful female leads of 1990s disaster cinema. Jamie Gertz, Cary Elwes, Lois Smith, Alan Ruck, Todd Field, Jeremy Davies, Anthony Rapp, and Alexa Peña-Vega are also still part of the living legacy of Twister. Each of them carried a piece of the movie forward in a different way. Some stayed in front of the camera. Some moved behind it. Some became known to younger audiences through entirely different roles. But two losses changed the way fans watch Twister today. Bill Paxton passed away in 2017. Philip Seymour Hoffman passed away in 2014. And that knowledge makes the film feel more fragile now.
When Bill Harding smiles, when Dusty laughs, when the team races into the storm with reckless joy, we are no longer only watching a summer blockbuster from 1996. We are watching time itself. We are watching people at a moment when everything still seemed ahead of them. That is why Twister feels different in 2026. The movie is still full of life, but some of the people who gave that life are no longer here. And yet, through the film, the chase continues. Twister did not fade away like many summer blockbusters from the 1990s. It stayed in people's memories. For some, it was the first disaster movie that made weather feel terrifying. For others, it was the film that turned storm chasing into something cinematic, dangerous, and almost heroic. It made audiences look at dark clouds differently. It made a tornado feel less like a special effect and more like a living force moving across the American landscape. And that is why the legacy of Twister continued long after 1996. The movie became part of a specific kind of American nostalgia. Open roads, small towns, radio warnings, diner conversations, and people trying to stand against something much bigger than themselves. Decades later, when Twisters arrived for a new generation, it proved that the fascination had never truly disappeared. The names were different, the faces were new, the technology had changed. But the feeling was familiar. People looking up at the sky, knowing they were about to face something they could never fully control. And for longtime fans, that connection mattered. Because the new generation did not erase the original. It reminded people why they loved it in the first place. Twister was never only about tornadoes. It was about obsession, grief, courage, love, and the strange human need to run toward the very thing that scares us most. The storm moved on. Hollywood moved on. But for millions of people, Twister never really left. And now, 30 years later, the final question is not just where the cast went. It is why their story still feels so powerful after the storm has passed. In the end, Twister was about chasing something that could never truly be captured. Joe Harding chased the storm because part of her was still standing in the moment that took her father away. Bill Harding came back because the life he tried to leave behind still knew his name. Dusty laughed into the wind as if danger itself was something to celebrate. Melissa saw the madness from the outside. Jonas tried to turn it into ambition. Aunt Meg reminded everyone that even storm chasers needed a place to come home to. And 30 years later, that is why this movie still matters. Helen Hunt remains the heart of Twister. Bill Paxton remains its soul. Philip Seymour Hoffman remains one of its brightest, most bittersweet surprises. Jamie Gertz, Cary Elwes, Lois Smith, Alan Ruck, and the supporting cast all carried pieces of the film into very different lives. Some found bigger fame. Some found quieter paths. Some left us far too soon. But together, they created something that still feels alive whenever the sky darkens, the wind rises, and the memory of that summer movie comes rushing back. Twister was about fear, wonder, grief, love, and the strange courage it takes to run toward what terrifies you. And maybe that is why, after all these years, we are still chasing it. Which Twister cast member surprised you the most after all this time? And do you still remember where you were when you first watched Twister?